Reporting a sexual assault is often described as incredibly traumatizing. And I've read lots of stories from you guys as well as other survivors about how sometimes reporting a sexual assault can actually be more traumatizing than the sexual assault itself. The process is scary, overwhelming, anxiety inducing, and many survivors choose not to report at all. And I don't blame them one single bit. Society often tells survivors that you have to report. And along with telling them to report, a lot of the times they say you have to go to therapy. And I am included in the therapy part. Like, there are so many episodes on here, and I am a big believer in the importance of therapy and how crucial it can be to your healing. And I still stand by that. But the reality is that not everybody has access to therapy. Therapy is expensive, wait lists can be incredibly long, and sometimes you just aren't ready to walk into a therapist's office. The truth with all of this is, as a society, we sort of created a sort of, quote unquote, one route map for what life after sexual assault is supposed to look like. Get a rape kit, report it, go to the police, go to therapy, and then boom, healed. Move on with your life. But that's not really possible or safe or the right route for everyone. And that's why we need alternatives for each of these steps along the way. Not necessarily replacements for all those things, but alternatives. And that's where the organization that we're going to be talking about today, called Enough, comes in. The organization Enough is reimagining what reporting, evidence, and recovery can look like for survivors. Today, I'm really excited to say that I'm joined by two people who are a part of that mission, Katie White and Dr. Maisie. Katie White is the co-founder of Enough, which is a revolutionary UK-based organization focused on rape prevention, support for survivors, and redefining recovery. Enough has worked with survivors to create the UK's first self-reporting and self-swab kit program, and is leading conversations that really push institutions to rethink what prevention looks like in this space. My second guest that I'll be talking with today is Dr. Maisie, who is a counseling psychologist and clinical lead at Enough. Dr. Maisie is helping build out the recovery tools at Enough. Her doctoral research focused on how society impacts survivors' experience of sexuality before and after sexual violence. She works directly with survivors and is a huge advocate for challenging the way that we use language around sexual assault. Without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Katie White and Dr. Maisie from Enough. Hi, Katie and Dr. Maisie. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, thank you for having us.
So I want to talk all about Enough and what you guys are doing. But before we get into that, I really want to ground people in what's happening in the UK. Because in the United States, we are beginning to have conversations around sexual violence. Still not enough of them, but today's episode is about you guys, and you guys are based in the UK. So I would really love if you could sort of lay the groundwork of what does sexual violence look like in the UK? Is it different than in the United States? How often is it happening? And who is it happening to?
Well, I think the first thing really is that it's very similar in countries around the world. We've got a national emergency here in the UK. That's how it's being described. It will be similar language used in the US, and it's reached a point where sexual violence is not something that can be ignored anymore. It's happening to 1 in 4 women, is the UK estimate, will be raped or sexually assaulted in their lifetime. It's actually reached the point now where it's twice as likely that a woman is going to be raped as to get cancer each year. And parents are sending their children to university not knowing and not having conversations about the biggest risk to them being sexual violence. And part of the reason it's been able to get to that point is because it's pretty much invisible in society. You don't really know about it unless it's happened to you or it's happened to someone close to you. And that's because people overwhelmingly and understandably don't feel comfortable reporting. And so there's many rape myths that exist in society that people believe is the reality. One of the biggest ones is that it's a stranger in an alleyway, but actually 90% of the time it's someone that you know, and it's in a space that's supposed to be safe. And again, those characteristics will be similar in the US and around the world. So it's become a political issue in many countries because it is falling on governments to try and solve what is a national emergency. In the UK, we hear things all the time like we need new innovations across the UK focusing on prevention. It's amazing that how little is being done in that space. So we hopefully are at quite a unique point at the moment where there really is a desire to do things differently and make a change. And frankly, it can't get any worse than it is today. It's already
Right.
horrific.
Yeah. I always feel like there's sort of this conversation around sexual assault is becoming so common and so bad and so prevalent that like we can't ignore it anymore. It's happening in our backyards, it's happening at our schools, it's happening in our homes. And so where have you seen sexual assault take place most? Does it tend to be on college campuses? Is it in people's homes? Where have you seen that take place?
From the work that we've been doing and speaking to students, the most common thing that I hear is anecdotally from students about either friends or mutual friends or partners, ex-partners, or people who have this sort of, they call it as like a sphere of invisible power and influence over other students, where they've never really been told no, and they get away with whatever they want. And so that's happened within sports teams. But also you hear things like, we're a house of 5 girls and 3 of us have been raped. And that sort of statement, that should not be happening on university campuses. And you look at the level that the university is reporting it as, sort of 5, less than 5 per year at a given university in the UK.
Right.
And then you hear 3 in our house have been raped. And it's, well, those two things
They don't match
don't
up.
add up. Yeah.
Sort of along these lines of these reporting, like you have the universities who are supposed to report and they're saying 5 a year, and then you have the homes who are saying, oh my gosh, 3 of us have been assaulted and only 5 of us are in this home. Why do you think that disparity takes place?
I mean, Maisie, you can probably speak about some of the psychology behind this in terms of wanting to come forward.
I think you touched on something really important earlier around almost it's become such a common experience that I think a lot of individuals who experience it themselves, initially, they can't label it sexual assault or rape because it's been so normalized within society as, a bad sexual experience, or
Right.
we've never been taught what consent looks like, what healthy sexual communication looks like. So that's the first challenge, really, is actually having the tools to recognize that something has happened that shouldn't have happened. And I think a lot of individuals, they recognize it internally as something traumatic and as an experience that was unwanted and negative, but they don't necessarily have the language or a safe system to use the language. And I think that's key as well. If there is no safe place to acknowledge what's happened, then you're certainly not going to be able to go that one step further and be able to report that officially. So I think
Right.
there's a lot of sort of social scripts that are embedded in people's experience themselves, but also understanding what constitutes a sexual assault.
And I think that's particularly true in university
Yeah.
campuses as well. And if you think of students starting university for the first time and feeling comfortable voicing things, even calling out a rape joke, right? We're not even to the level of reporting rape, but being prepared to stand up against others and risk being the only one to say something. Many people, it's just not worth the risk for them, or they decide they don't want to. And so there's a real fear at university. Well, if I report it, will I be believed? Will I be ostracized? Especially if the person, the perpetrator, is popular and well liked. And we did research at the very start of developing enough where we learned from people, if they did disclose to someone close to them, what was the reaction? And from the sample that we spoke to, more often than not, a close friend would deny or invalidate what you had been through because socially it was too inconvenient for them. And so people will be aware of other people speaking out and what happened to them. And so it just creates such a high cost of coming forward even to your friends versus the potential benefit that you might eventually get from it.
I'm going to jump in because I think that highlights something really important about trauma and the definition of trauma. And I think we so often understand trauma as an isolated event, something that happens once, and that's the traumatic experience.
Right.
But that's not true. Like every interaction that we have thereafter about the traumatic experience can itself become traumatic, and it's kind of re-traumatizing. Every interaction we have where we're not appropriately contained or validated adds to that layer of trauma. So it's an ongoing process, really. And I think what we've seen from the individuals we've spoken to is that there are so many barriers at each level of the system, whether that's somebody's parents, somebody's friend, employer, university. There are so many barriers within those systems, not necessarily due to the fault of those individuals, but because of the lack
Right.
of education around the topic.
Right. I even heard recently that, like, if you're having a conversation with somebody and you disclose your sexual assault and the other person starts asking questions, well, where did that happen? How did that happen? What were you wearing? Why didn't you fight back? That sometimes that reaction from the person is them trying to, like, their brain working out, how do I not get in this situation? And so, like, that reaction is not a trauma informed reaction, but it's like almost their protection mechanism is taking over and trying to, like, figure out, oh my gosh, I don't want that to happen to me. But to the person who discloses, it just is invalidating and can be a really painful experience.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really common thing with victim blaming. It's almost a projection of their own fear. And I think to accept that, sexual assault and rape can happen in any situation is terrifying.
Yeah.
So, psychologically, it becomes easier to look for reasons why the victim, survivor, may have done something to influence it. So it gives them more control or perceived control. And this doesn't even happen consciously. This isn't something that happens because the person is actively trying to minimize somebody's experience, but it's about protecting themselves.
Right. Right. Dr. Maisie, I would love if you could walk us through what the first sort of like 24 to 48 hours after someone has experienced sexual assault, what does it look like on the inside for them? Because like you were saying, that I think a lot of people know that something is wrong and something
Yeah.
happened, but you don't always recognize what it is. And so what's sort of going on inside of someone's body right after they're sexually assaulted in the first hours and days?
I mean, I think it's everybody will experience different things. And I think everybody's own experience will be unique to them and the circumstances where, their assault took place. If, for example, people who are in a relationship with the perpetrator, their survival response will maintain for as long as they're in that environment. So they are going to have to continue protecting themselves. And
Right.
that survival response might look very different to somebody who's come home after a night out and it's happened whilst they've been on a night out. So it's quite hard to answer that kind of
Right.
generally. However, I think there will be certain common themes internally is that after trauma, a person's nervous system, so essentially all of their organs within their body, become focused on protection rather than connecting with people. So their entire system is focused on keeping themselves safe, which
Good.
means they'll be more likely to be picking up on signs of danger. And in that
Good.
situation, our brain becomes really biased towards anything that could be perceived as a threat. And our brain isn't very good at just sort of deciding whether that's a real threat or
Right.
an imagined or exaggerated threat. So the person will be existing in that survival brain. And that might look different depending on how they respond as well. So some people will be very much entering into more of a withdrawn, shut down mode
Okay.
where they feel very numb and disconnected. And I think what you said there about acknowledging that something's happened, there will be a physical awareness that something awful's happened, but they might not be able to connect to it. So
Okay.
they withdraw into themselves, almost kind of like when somebody's there, but they're not really there. Other people may enter into more of a kind of fight response where they just need to busy themselves and almost kind of not think about it, that sort of
Right.
avoidance mode where I will just do something to
Yeah.
distract
And
myself.
everything.
Yeah. It's really difficult to answer because it really does
No,
depend
that's
on the
okay.
individual and what their typical way of coping with things are.
No,
Uh,
that totally makes sense. And like overall what I'm hearing is that like there is physical impacts from sexual assault that you don't realize. Like the nervous system, like you were saying, which the nervous system is tied into like your digestive system, right?
yeah,
And your cardiovascular system. And right, I'm not sure if I'm on the right page, but
yeah, absolutely. So our nervous system is basically all of our bodily functions that we don't kind of consciously control. And we have a little, I mean, this isn't a technical term. The technical
right,
term is neuroception, but it's a really complicated word.
complex.
So I just refer to it as the fact that our brain has a little scanner and it's attached to the oldest part of our brain. which is the survival part of our brain. And it's constantly looking for cues in our environment that tell us whether we're safe or whether we're in danger. And that then sends information to every single organ in your body so that it knows how to react in a way that best keeps you safe. So after sexual violence, that scanner is going to be incredibly overactive, and it's going to be picking up on signs of danger everywhere. So what that then communicates to your body is you can't enter into your relaxed rest and digest state. You need to be prepared for danger. And for some people, like I say, that prepared for danger will be their kind of fight or flight response. For some people, it will be, it's actually safer for me to just completely disconnect and withdraw from everything that's happening around me. And this doesn't happen consciously. If we had time to think about it, well, then we're using the wrong strategy.
Right.
If we think about it from caveman perspective, I suppose, if they thought about the predator that was kind of coming into camp and what to do, it would already be there. So, this is very much, it happens in a millisecond, and there's no conscious choice around what survival strategies is chosen. It's your body picking up on the information that it's receiving and trying to keep you alive.
See, and when you say that, like, that always breaks my heart whenever I hear people who have been through this and they say things like, why didn't I fight? Like, I wanted to, but I couldn't. And I feel like there's this huge lack of understanding that, like, you don't get to choose how you respond to sexual assault. Like, your body chooses for you. And almost kind of like switching it and thinking about like trying to be like grateful for that survival mechanism. Your body knew best. You just have to trust that. But it's so hard when, trying to also come to terms with what happened to you. And so,
Absolutely. And I think there's then a wider context to that around the social scripts that influence some of those blaming messages, like we were talking about earlier. If my body could choose, then maybe I could choose a better response. And it then goes back into that kind of self-protective mode for other people. But as you say, it doesn't work like that.
And I think it's so hard for people to know that actually it is incredibly normal to not realize what's happened and not recognize it or label it straight away. It's actually 60% of survivors don't recognize immediately what's happened to them. And then later on, at whatever point that is, months, years down the line, when you do realize and then you think, well, I've kind of passed that time frame where I could have done something about it, it just reinforces further blame and shame. And a truly trauma-informed response to reporting is one where you help someone have that time that they need to come to terms with what's happened to them, rather than it feeling, and this is what we've been told, that it's kind of a all or nothing approach. And most of the time that choice feels like it's being presented to you when the choice isn't possible anymore.
right. My next question was going to be related to this idea of how people in the UK look at sexual assault. Because like when I think, which I don't imagine that it's that much different. I'm acting like it's some place that's like in outer space. But when I think about the United States, I think people think that, okay, sexual assault is something that happens in alleyways. It's something that you get over quickly. At some point in time, you're fine. We don't need to keep talking about it. And so how do you think people in the UK view sexual assault?
In summary, because there's so many different ways and people, but I think people are quite scared of it, quite scared of acknowledging it's happening. Because if you acknowledge it's happening on a personal level, but also on a societal and national level, you have to be doing something about it. You can't just know that that's happening and go no further. And I think that's quite scary institutionally as well. We see it with universities that many of them are aware of the scale of the issue or have some indication of how frequent it is, and being far higher than the numbers might reveal, but not really knowing what to do about it in a way that doesn't make them look like they're the ones at fault, which they're not. It's not on universities to take all the blame, but they can take part of the responsibility in solving it, as we all can. So that there's definitely a fear around it. There's even a fear among women. We were talking about this earlier, how people want to convince themselves that it will never happen to them, and so they do believe those rape myths because it's reassuring. And I've learned even from judges and barristers that they would prefer to have an all-female jury. A defence barrister would prefer an all-female jury because his view was that women turn on each other quicker than men would, because women like to believe it happens to a certain type of woman, not all women. So there's so much confusion, fear, and I want to say cowardice as well, in having this ignorance and kind of apathy towards it on a societal level with failing generations that are growing up. So yeah, that's my view.
I would echo all of those points. And I think kind of observationally through the clinical experience that I've had, there certainly seems to be a sense of almost internal comparison. And if people have experienced rape within a relationship or an acquaintance on a night out, they seem to compare their experience and minimize it for themselves compared to the more violent depictions that we see in the media or on TV, the stranger in an alleyway. And it almost adds to that self-blame and shame that they're experiencing a trauma response to something that doesn't match what they've been told sexual violence is. And that adds a real extra layer of difficulty kind of clinically, because you have to first validate that this is sexual assault and this is sexual violence. It's really pervasive. I've noticed that.
One thing actually that I'd like to add is about how it is for young men, because I think in some ways it's probably quite confusing for young men, because I don't know the specifics on the laws on this in the US, but in the UK it was only earlier in the summer where non-fatal strangulation was banned in porn. So
Like this year?
This year, yeah, in the UK.
Wow.
And so it was very normal for young men and young women to be watching porn and seeing someone strangling someone else, and that being a supposedly consensual, happy sexual experience. And so for a young man at university who is getting most of their sex education from porn, who is talking to their friends who have watched similar content, who's talking a lot about, uni's about going out, having sex, all of that, for them to try and weigh up, okay, it's fine for me to non-fatally strangle someone during sex, but it's not fine for me to have sex with someone while they're asleep. Those things seem on a very similar level to some people, but one of them is a crime that you can go to prison for, and the other is something that was, until now, being encouraged via porn. So I think for young men, it feels like this kind of landmine of, I don't know what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say? And when it comes to male allyship, we've witnessed, if you give young men an opportunity to be an ally in this space, they take it. They just haven't really had many opportunities and don't want to put a foot wrong.
Yeah.
But we have our paddling pools, we give out our kits, we talk to them about our work. And just as many boys want to get involved as girls, because they want to care. It's cool to care. It's cool to be there for your friend. It's deeply uncool and potentially friendship ending to say the wrong thing. And that's why I think so many of them have been scared to know what to do. But to some extent, I really do sympathize with young men, because I think it's sort of an impossible, confusing landmine really for them right now.
Right. And I feel like I see that too. I think the conversation has really started to become like a fuck all men sort of
Yes.
conversation. And that it really scares me, because I don't want to be in that land, because at the end of the day, yes, men are mainly the people committing these crimes, but you don't have to be one of those men. Like, you can
No.
be a good man. And I think if we could sort of open a window for men to help them see what being a good man looks like. And frankly, your relationships with women will be far better if you are a safe man. And also, you are going to feel like a better person at the end of the day as well. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think it's a really dangerous territory to just write off all men as bad. And a lot of the times they haven't, this feels like a little scary territory, but, a lot of the times they haven't been educated. And that doesn't mean that assaulting somebody is okay because they didn't know about it. It just means that, like, they deserve to get educated on this too.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that you brought that up.
I think that's a really important point as well around safety. And because, these men have that scanner in their brain too. And if we're not creating safe spaces where we can have open conversations, then the signals that they're receiving are one of threat, and they will respond with a survival response too. And that might be completely avoiding the conversation and shutting down, which we see and have seen. It might be feeling defensive and feeling a need to, I suppose, fight response, and shut down and criticize. And so I think we have to really be open about creating a safe space to have transparent and difficult conversations that feel safe for everybody, because otherwise we are alienating. And I agree when you say it feels a bit uncomfortable to say this, but their nervous systems need to feel safe too, to be able to engage in reflective thinking. Because cognitively, if we don't feel safe, we're not thinking flexibly, we're not thinking reflectively from a kind of neuroscience perspective. So it is vital. And I think, like you say, there are certain spaces within the sphere that probably don't feel safe to men.
Yeah. 100%. If you could speak to the men out there who are sort of teetering on the edge of, okay, I have friends who make rape jokes, who don't do cool things, and they're stuck in this space of, I don't know what kind of man I want to be, like I feel lost and confused. What would you say to men who are in positions like that?
I'd say you're not the only one. People rarely stand up for what's right because they think no one else will follow them. But actually, if you stand up for what you know is right, other people will admire you. They'll be relieved that someone else has done it, and they will follow you and do the same. And they will do what you did next time with another group because they will want to be the person that you were. So I would just say stand up for it.
I don't think I could put it better than that.
That was so good. Thank you. I would really love to switch gears and talk about the incredible organization that Katie, you are a co-founder of, and Dr. Maisie, you are a part of. It is called Enough. And so for those who do not know what your organization is about and what you guys do, could you tell us, where did this idea come from? What are you guys doing at Enough? And yeah, just sort of give me the layout of the land.
So we spoke a bit already about how survivors understandably don't want to come forward, don't want to report. It's 5 in 6 women, 4 in 5 men, 90% of students in the UK. Those are the numbers of people who right now are getting no support because the existing support isn't working for them. And so we've created Enough off the back of what those people want. So survivors asked us through the research we did for 3 things, and we've created those. So Enough is a solution to what survivors who are unsupported today are asking for. The first thing is the ability to document and store and save what's happened to you without going through a formal reporting process, so that you have more time to think about what you want to do and you have options for later. The second thing is to prevent it happening to other people. One of the most common things we heard actually at the start was the feeling of failing because you haven't reported it and kept other people safe, which that feeling is, that shame and blame is not on the individual who it's happened to. And then the last thing is to get better without depending on therapy. 75% of all trauma sufferers will not access therapy, and they deserve some form of recovery that helps them. So we've built an encrypted platform that anyone can go onto at any point after it's happened to them. So it can be hours after, it can be weeks after, it can be years after. You log in, it's myenough.com/report. And you have the option of adding 3 things. There's a message that you can share with the world, and that is done anonymously via our social media. And so every single message that goes out is seen by hundreds of thousands of people. It's a way of shifting the power and the voice from perpetrators to survivors. The second thing that is on that page is a private encrypted account that only you see. Not even we at Enough see it. It's literally like the highest form of security journal you could possibly imagine. And you could come back to it at any point if you wanted to and add something else. And again, it will be timestamped. You can also add a self-testing DNA swab. Those look like this. This is the packet. And inside here's a DNA swab. Looks a bit like a COVID swab. You can self-test. This does need to be within the week after. And you put your DNA barcode number in and you get 2 types of results from that. You're told the number and gender of profiles on that sample. It's all anonymized. We're not accusing anyone. We're giving validation. Boys can use this as well as girls. And the second thing is half of it is frozen for 20 years in case you want to go to the police. And so we're not signposting we are signposting people towards the police or SARC first. We're not pushing people into any one avenue or another. We're giving choice. And we reserve the right for someone to have more than their word if they do decide to report later. Again, this is something that's not widely understood, is even of the people who do go to the police, most go at least a week after it's happened. In the UK, it's only 1 in 18 people who go to the police soon enough to even have the chance of a DNA collection and a witness statement written. We are giving people that option for later. And even if they never take it, it's power and it's some level of control of knowing you could do that if you wanted. But the purpose of these kits more broadly and the purpose of the campaign is very much deterrence. So we did a pilot at one university in the UK last year in Bristol, and we gave out 8,000 of these to students. And that meant that every friendship group, every flat, every uni house had one of these or had access to one of these. And that sent a very clear signal very quickly across campus, partly because of the viral social media as well, that if you don't get consent, there's consequences. And perpetrators, you are warned because your DNA is going to be held on file if you rape someone. And it made the invisible visible. It created accountability that didn't exist before. It started conversations. We heard from students that they would take one of these, they'd put it on their table, they'd come back, and everyone they lived with would be sat around the table having a deep chat about consent for 3 hours. And that never would have happened otherwise. We're hearing similar things from parents that they get one of these, they leave it out, and they're sat there thinking, God, I don't know how to have this conversation with my child, but they don't need to worry about it because they come back in and their child has already found enough on Instagram and is looking at what we do and saying, wow, that's so brilliant. Thank you for getting me this. Things like the University Rugby Club, all holding one of these saying we stand with survivors, talking of male allyship. That sends such a strong signal of what it takes to be a male role model and create change. They said it's not men v women, it's all of us against sexual violence.
I love it.
And so we witnessed in such a short space of time, such incredible social deterrence. And that's a new concept because typically when you think of a crime, you think of criminal deterrence, but criminal deterrence for rape is less than 1% convictions. Whereas students in Bristol were telling us 70% of them were saying this has prevented sexual violence. 90% of them were aware of what enough was. That's well beyond a behavioural tipping point to create change. And then the kind of final part of enough, that third bit about being able to get better without depending on therapy. This is built from meeting Maisie and working on something that could help people who either didn't want therapy or didn't feel comfortable getting therapy yet or couldn't afford it maybe or was on the waiting lists. And so we've learned that it can be just as effective to watch videos with a therapist as to go and have therapy. So we make that option available for people through our recovery channel. Maisie, do you want to talk a bit more about the specifics of it?
Yeah, so I think it's important to kind of, I suppose, just set the scene, I suppose, for therapy within the UK, because it's quite different, obviously, to the States. So there are really kind of 3 options for accessing therapy in the UK. It's through the NHS health service, that's our National Health Service, where you would typically go to your GP and you'd be referred to counselling or a mental health team. But the entry criteria, I suppose, is very stringent, and it's often based on a person's risk. And what we often find is that people are either too risky for lower level counselling services, and so they won't work with them, but they're not risky enough to work with a community mental health team. So they're then left with not a lot of other options.
Quick question. When you say risky, do you mean like somebody who is at risk of suicide? Who is it? Like, what do you mean by risky?
Yeah, we define risk as somebody who might be actively self-harming, they're having suicidal thoughts, they're still in an abusive and unsafe relationship. So there's lots of kind of barriers already there. And even if you are lucky enough to receive support from one of those services, the waiting lists for psychological therapy are, anywhere between kind of 3 weeks to 3 years, depending on your local area. And obviously there's also the option of private therapy, but typically that is ranging from probably anywhere between kind of £40 to £120 an hour. And that will vary depending on somebody's experience and what level of therapy that they require. So whilst we are not advertising ourselves and would never advertise ourselves as a replacement for therapy, we are providing something when a person is probably getting nothing. And if they are getting something, they can use our tools in contingency with more formal support. One of our lovely ladies who did one of our focus group described it as having kind of like coping skills in your pocket. So kind of whenever you need them, they're there, accessible. So I suppose the ethos of our tools are to kind of support the person where they are in that moment. So we've created a range of tools from kind of shorter Instagram reels to longer kind of psychoeducation videos that are all available on YouTube. We've got a series of tactic videos to help with grounding, managing flashbacks. And we're also currently building a more structured recovery platform that essentially is based on the principles of trauma-focused therapy, but all utilized online. So it's basically a guided recovery program. We're in the kind of initial phases of that. And since we've launched, we've learned a lot about what people want and what people don't want. And we have a co-creation panel that we're meeting monthly with experts by experience who are helping to design the resources, give us feedback, make sure that everything we're doing is centered on survivors' voices. Of course, we're still utilizing clinical research and making sure that everything we're doing is evidence-based, but not at the cost of losing what survivors are telling us they want and need.
Right. I love this. Go for it, Katie.
Well, Maisie, you kind of said it in that we're trying to help people that are getting nothing today. And I think that's one of the core ethoses of Enough, that we are replacing inaction. We're not saying, okay, come use self-testing kits instead of going to the police, or instead of going to a sexual assault center, or come watch Maisie's videos instead of getting therapy if that's what you need. It's an acknowledgement that, yes, police, SARC, all of that, sexual assault centre, that's what that is in the UK. All of that comes first if you want it to. Otherwise, you should be able to have access to other options and other options that work for you, rather than feeling semi to blame because you're left with nothing. And I think another really important ethos behind Enough is it's not on survivors to change to meet the needs of the system. So it's not on survivors to suddenly start reporting to the police because that's what the system tells them the solution should be. It's actually on the system to provide more choice and optionality to be able to help more people.
I really like that a lot. And something that is popping into my head, and I am only going to ask this because I can imagine people might be wondering this. I think that people might say, okay, well, isn't this going to increase the potential false accusation rates? And so what would you say to people who say that?
You know, I've been so relieved to actually have few people say that.
Fabulous.
It was the thing that we expected to be the top criticism, but it's actually not at all. And I think, fortunately, there is some understanding that false accusations are rare. There are still sort of pockets of the internet that don't believe that, of course. But in public, when you're speaking to students or speaking to anyone about this work, if their reaction is to ask about false accusations, they know that that's a high threat situation, speaking of the scanner, among their friends, and they're not going to take that risk. So on the whole, it doesn't actually come up. But when it does, we have a very straightforward answer, which is we are not a platform for any level of accusation. If you want to make a report officially, if you want to accuse someone formally, you take the evidence that you have collected via Enough and you take that to the police and you go through the same police process as normal. And that's where any level of accusation, whether it's real or false, happens. We are a validating platform and we are about social deterrence and we're about helping people get better. That's what we're trying to do. We're not naming and shaming anyone.
Thank you for that. I would love if you could sort of walk me through if somebody, let's say somebody was sexually assaulted and they find your swab, what does the process look like from, how do they get your swab? How are they sending it in? How are they actually collecting the evidence? Just sort of like walk me through step by step what that looks like.
So in the UK, because it's important, you can't actually access these kits in the US at the moment. That will change. We will come there. But right now it's just the sort of verbal reporting, the written reporting that you can do from the US. But if you're in the UK, it's sort of two routes in. One is that anyone can go online to go to myenough.com/kit and they can order one of these, and they cost £20, and that covers the lab cost, which is actually far higher than that, but you're subsidizing someone else's. We don't believe that people should have to pay to have access to this. The only reason that we've got that available is we want to make it possible for people who are outside of our pilot cities to get one of these, and we do it at the lowest price possible. But the way we want it to happen, and the way that we did this for our first pilot in Bristol, was we gave these out for free to students in the thousands. So it was very likely that you had one or your friend had one already. We set up safe spaces across the city where you could go into a bar or a cafe or a club or a restaurant and say, can I have a hot orange? And you were given one of these for free, no questions asked. And so the aim is to remove and reduce all possible barriers that would stop someone from thinking they wanted to do something, because after it's happened, even getting dressed or leaving your house can feel like the most horrendous task and impossible to fathom. So that's why we try and get it into the hands of students already, both for that deterrence, but also because it would make reporting so much easier. We are also looking for kind of on-demand delivery partners too, so that you could go into your Uber Eats or Deliveroo or DoorDash in the US and get one of these kits coming to you. And that could be part of a corporate's social responsibility, that they actually give these out for free. You can add it to a shopping basket for free, one of these kits coming to your door. So a few different ideas, but what we've done so far is just given out as many as we can, essentially.
Right. Let's say somebody has the swab. Where are they, like, once they take the DNA, where are they going? Where is it going to?
Sure. So
yes.
this is with Tom, who's our co-founder in this and part of the team with us. He came up with this very clever idea where this kit unrolls, you see it's layered there, to become this returns envelope. So once you've used the swab, you put it back in here, seal it. That's already got the free post returns label on it. So you literally just take that to a post box or post office, put it through. And as long as you have linked your barcode number, which is there, and it's also on the swab, to your account, this arrives at the lab, and in 48 hours max, you will get a notification saying your results are ready, and it will tell you one male profile, one DNA profile, or whatever it is, and the other half is frozen. And people are using it to confirm whether they've been date raped or not as well, because they wake up in the morning and they don't know what's happened. And so actually just having, one male profile on there or one female profile, whatever it is reassuring to people. So it's very, very easy. It requires little to no sort of formal process in speaking to someone. And you could even give it to your friend if you wanted to put it into the post box for you.
Wow, I love how you've kind of taken all of these points of friction and reduced them to try to make the process as easy as possible. And so just to clarify, to make sure I'm understanding and that my audience is too, is so this initial swab would show if there's the presence of somebody else's DNA. And then the second half that's frozen, that could be tested in the future? Or...
Yes, exactly. So we freeze it untested. The lab freezes it untested, so that if it is passed on to the police essentially have a fresh sample of DNA, because they would prefer to analyze it themselves versus be given the results. It's more trustworthy as well. So we give it frozen, untested, and then they will compare it to something called the National DNA Database. They will see if there's a match. If there's not a match, given that most rapists are known to the survivor, there will be a requested sample. The testimony is likely going to be more important than DNA in a trial, because DNA doesn't show consent, whether the police has collected it, a SARC has collected it, or we have. The more powerful thing may end up being that witness statement where you wrote down exactly what happened. And we know that a very common line of attack in courts from the defense is, you're making this up. You're just bored and you're regretting it now, and you don't like him. Like, you didn't do anything at the time. Why should we believe you now? And if you can point to the fact you've written exactly what happened and you took DNA, it removes their ability to do that. And it suddenly becomes, well, no, I knew what happened was wrong. I knew I wasn't ready to go forward with this grueling court process. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I absolutely love what you guys have done. And I'm so grateful that you've thought about like every single portion of the process, whether it be reporting and the medical side, as well as the recovery side, which is so important and I think forgotten about a lot. What is next for Enough? Where, like, if somebody says, okay, I want to follow along, how can people find you or what are your socials? I'll link them all down below, but just what's
Sure.
next for Enough and how can people follow along to see what happens for you
Yeah.
guys?
So to find us, website is myenough.com. The Instagram and TikToks are enough to end rape. And then the recovery channels are enough_recovery. And if you access any one of these, you'll be able to find the links for the others. And in terms of what's next, there's a couple of things because we've built enough based on what survivors are asking for. And as you've pointed out, we've reduced lots of friction and created solutions where there's been gaps before. But we do also need to work out with the sector how that fits in, because you can't create a new idea without some level of disruption and confusion. And that definitely has been the case at points with Enough in the wider sexual violence sector. And I think there was an understandable fear that, what if this replaces the police or SARCs? We don't want people to go to Enough instead of going to the police. And so we've learnt loads in that respect. It's literally impossible to make a report to Enough without being advised to go to the police or a sexual assault centre first. And I think people were also confused about, are these kits going to be admissible? And it's wonderful that we've had the confirmation from a leading rape barrister that yes, self-collected evidence can be admissible in court. But there hasn't been a court case yet. So there's a lot of questions in people's minds. And I think we just all need to work together to make clear there is a hierarchy. Police and SARCs always first, therapy always first. But that can be true while also being prepared to give more than nothing to others. We think there's a real potential, not just for social deterrence with Enough, but also complementing criminal deterrence and creating intelligence that would otherwise be lost. And then beyond the sector and making sure we're complementing the sector and supporting the wider sector, we're about to announce some formal evaluations in cities in the UK. And what that means is we tested the ideas in the pilot in Bristol, but that wasn't an independent assessment. It wasn't in collaboration with all the different parts of the city that you might expect. It was very much see if this idea works. We're being told it has value, but let's see the impact it has. Based off of that, cities are inviting us to go there and to work with the universities, to work with the corporates, to work with the police and the crime commissioners to set up 3-year-long evaluations and independently assess and research the impact that we're having. So that's a really exciting next step for us and has happened very quickly because
Congratulations.
we launched just under a year ago. So it's a really, really wonderful step to be happening this soon. And as part of that, we're developing our recovery platform, and we're learning from AI and building a resource that is going to be more practical for someone to actually assess their improvement in PTSD, and really get a more tangible sense of their recovery progress.
Wow. So with all of that, do you think that you'll be in the United States at some point? Like you said you want to, but I'm just like, I'm so excited for you guys and I want this to be everywhere. And so is this sort of after this round of research, maybe are you hoping that you'll be able to expand beyond, or is it too
Yeah,
soon?
we need to get this working in the UK and be national across the UK. And then, we need to be in the US. Sadly, we need to be in all these places, Australia, Canada. The most dangerous country in the world to be a woman is India. There's probably not a country where we don't need to be. So yes, it's just a question of how long it takes us to get there. We are a non-profit, so things do tend to take a bit longer than sort of when you're VC backed and have millions of pounds to spend. But we're doing it in the right way and we will get there eventually, yeah.
And I guess the recovery tool that we're creating, there's no reason why that can't be accessed by people all over the world as well, in terms of the more therapeutic side of what we're doing through Enough, which will hopefully be coming in the kind of coming months.
Thank you. Yes, I'll keep an eye out for that. And I want to switch gears a little bit. I really would love to talk about sort of some misunderstandings when it comes to some clinical phrases and just phrases that we hear surrounding sexual assault. There are so many of these phrases. I want to go through with you, Dr. Maisie, and I want to go through some of these terms that can have a really negative repercussion and really have stigma around them. And so we're just going to kind of go through this list of terms, and you're going to tell me what they actually mean versus the stigmas that surround them. And then if we can rename them, then we'll rename them. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds
Great.
good.
So we're going to start with the term delayed realization. What does this mean in clinical terms versus what people think it means?
Yes. I mean, I hate the term. And the clinical kind of, I suppose, explanation would be when somebody hasn't, I suppose, connected to their memories, to the trauma memories. So something's happened, but it may be months, years later that they're starting to connect with what's happened and sort of memories might resurface. That's the technical term, but actually, I think there's several issues with this. We're criticizing initially. We're saying somebody has delay, which I think already has connotations that that's somehow not the correct way that we're supposed to realize something. And it's very blaming. And also, we're assuming that there has been absolutely no recognition of trauma. And I guess from what we were speaking about earlier, there absolutely will have been some acknowledgement of trauma, whether that's physically held in their body, the emotions that somebody experiences. Just because they haven't disclosed to somebody doesn't mean they haven't realized that something traumatic has happened. And I think there's a real discrepancy between realizing something and sharing it with somebody. And the two, to me, shouldn't be compared, because somebody can realize something awful's happened, but actually they have nowhere safe to be able to share it, or they're still within an abusive relationship where it's not safe for them to acknowledge what's happening because that's dangerous. So we actually discussed this in our co-creation panel, and somebody came up with a really lovely term to replace this, which was coming to terms with. And I really liked that because I think it shows that it's not something that happens once and then it's done.
Right.
We're constantly evolving our interpretation of what's happened to us, the meaning that we attach to what's happened to us. And there will be various different times in our life where we realize different things about what's happened to us. And when we choose it safe enough to share, it is true that memories can be buried, and they are often stored as sort of like fragments, whereas often we can store a memory with like a clear beginning, middle, and an end. With trauma memories, it doesn't always work like that, and there may be bits of the memory that we have forgotten, we can't access. But that doesn't mean that there's anything delayed about that. It doesn't mean that our brain is faulty in any way. It actually means your brain is protecting you because perhaps you're not ready to cope with that. It's not safe for you to bring those memories to the surface. So I think, the term is just incredibly
We need to get rid of it.
Yeah, that's the word for it. It's
Throw it out
all
the window. We're done with it.
Yeah.
And now we're going to say coming to terms with instead of delayed realization.
Yeah. And respecting that happens throughout, a really long span of time. Sometimes, my experience happened years ago, but there are certain things that I learned through my work with enough where I've thought, I'm defining it in a different way now. I'm able to tell more people about it. So I'm still coming to terms with. And I think that's something that is constantly evolving, and that's okay and that's normal.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've learned through our co-creation panel is you can use words without realizing the harm they're doing on you. And when we had that discussion about the term delayed realization and actually what should we call it instead, for many people it felt like a sort of aha moment. I didn't realize there was anything wrong with that, but as soon as I think about it, there so obviously is. And that would have been compounding shame that everyone was feeling. So, I mean, I know we're going to go through more examples, but I think a common theme across all of them is that it's until you really think about it, you don't realize sort of the harm it might be having on yourself or others.
100%. And it's hard because I find myself like I'm always worried that I'm going to accidentally upset somebody or offend somebody. And so I want to acknowledge that it is challenging. Like this is a really this is a sacred space and it's a hard space to be in. And like the more that we can learn and educate ourselves, the better we're going to be able to support people. But it doesn't need to be a, oh my gosh, you're horrible for using that. Like that's just what you knew. And
Yeah.
so that's, yeah, a good point that I need to remind myself as well, is not to be mad at myself for using the wrong term, just to, you continue to be better, and we make mistakes. It's okay.
Yeah, and people can tell whether you mean well or not. I've said delayed realization many times, and I think it's more important to talk about the topic than be scared of using the wrong words.
Part of my training as a psychologist was developing this curiosity, and we call it the kind of not knowing stance. And, there's something about the humility of accepting that we might get it wrong and acknowledging that when we're talking with people who've had experiences, and using that curious lens. I'm wondering if this word feels right, but I might be wrong, and constantly giving the power back to the person you're talking to. And how would you describe it? What word would you prefer I use? I'm not the expert here and I might get it wrong. And I think acknowledging that position, which is hard for people to do sometimes because, we want to get it right and we want to help. But sometimes we're human, and words have different meanings for different people. So I think, as Katie said, it's much more important to have the conversation than avoid it for fear of using the wrong word.
I love that. I need to remember that too, that asking somebody, like, how does it feel to you? Yeah, I really like that. Okay, the next term is hyper-sexuality. Now, I don't know if in my head, I don't know if this is a bad term per se, but I would love to hear your perspective on the term hypersexuality and sort of what we think it means versus what it actually means. Are those aligned? Talk to me about it.
I mean, I think, again, it's very clinical in its nature, and it doesn't particularly give you any great level of detail about the individual, because to understand whether somebody is hypersexual, we first need to understand what their general sexuality looks like. What's hypersexual for me might not be hypersexual for you. So I think it's not a very person-centered term. And it's also based on this assumption that there is a normal level of sexual arousal and sexuality that we have. And that is just not true. Sexuality is an incredibly subjective experience, and it's influenced by so many different factors on any given day that I think the term lacks validity, definitely. And I think from a clinical perspective, and sort of looking at hypersexuality from the research and how it's used within this kind of group of individuals, it's often seen as, which is another term I hate, a maladaptive coping response. To me, there's no such thing as a maladaptive coping response. Everything is protecting you in some way. It might just be that there are some unwanted consequences of using that coping strategy, but its function is protective. But the way hypersexuality is written about is, it indicates that it's somehow negative. And I mean, and I could do a full podcast on this, because I think that
Keep going, girl.
Yeah, that represents a wider social context of how we view female sexuality and how much sex women should be having and what that sex should look like. And actually, I interviewed women for my thesis, for my doctorate research around sexuality after sexual violence. And one of the common themes was that women were having more sex after they experienced sexual violence. And it was, in a way, it was to prove to themselves that they still could. And they were engaging in sex quite regularly. And it was almost this desperate attempt to not lose such an important part of themselves. And it also led to more trauma, because they were experiencing that sex in a way where they felt unsafe. They weren't connected to their bodies when they were having sex. They were probably having sex that didn't match their desire levels. So desire is our sort of motivation to engage in sex, and the arousal is sort of the physical sensations that come when we are. And they were often mismatched, and the body was then receiving very conflicting messages, which was indicative of trauma responses. But the intention behind that was to try and maintain a sense of sexuality, which is so important. That will differ depending on the individual. of how important that is. But it's a huge part of a person's recovery, and I think that's often neglected. And I think the term hypersexuality is often, I mean, demonized is the word that comes to mind. It might feel a bit dramatic, but it feels like, they're putting themselves at risk and they're being promiscuous. That word
Right.
gets thrown around a lot. When in actual fact, there's a function to it. And I don't want to sit here and generalize what that function might be for somebody. Some people like to think they're taking control back. I've spoken to some women who've explored, more S&M sex because that empowers them. From a clinical perspective, that might be viewed as hypersexuality.
Right.
I think the important thing is to be really curious about what function is this sex serving, and does it feel healing? Is it feeling harmful, but it's still serving a protective function? And kind of going back to that curiosity of, for this person in this context, how is sex showing up for you? How would you like sex to show up for you? And I don't think we can put that down to a singular term.
And that's okay. We don't have to.
Yeah.
It's just understanding the idea of kind of like how you explained hypersexuality. And I think that that's really relatable. Like, I definitely relate to that. Like, I just found myself on so many dates with so many men that I had no business being with. And all I wanted was for them to open up and for them to feel like they could say anything. And I had this like control over them because I really lacked that in my own sexual assault experience. And so I do believe that it's something people experience a lot. And I love how you said that, sexuality is different for everybody. And your sort of base level, I don't know if that sounds bad too, I don't know, of, sexuality is different
Yeah,
depending on like before and after and all of that.
absolutely.
My final term is closure.
Mm.
Now, I think a lot of people picture closure for sexual assault survivors kind of looking like, okay, you report and then you go to court. And then once your day in court is had, which is very rare, all of a sudden everything is fine. And now you have closure because you quote unquote know what happened. And the end, you run off into the sunset. What does closure actually look like a lot of the times for survivors? And what does it mean to find that? Is that something that you can find?
I think you probably can find it, but I don't know whether the word closure, it sort of has connotations that there's a kind of like finality to it. Like there is an ending to this, and I'm working towards a specific point. And I think there is no end point. I think there's a process of recovery, and I think that fluctuates. And I think it's a way of being, I guess. And the way of being, hopefully, is one where, the assault doesn't define you. There are other parts of yourself, and you've integrated those other parts. You have meaningful social relationships, meaningful intimate relationships, and the intensity of the assault has reduced. But that doesn't mean that it won't still impact you. That doesn't mean that you won't have days where you do feel triggered, days where you might not be having flashbacks, but sex might feel difficult. I think recovery is such a broad spectrum of things. And I think it's very individual as, to what matters to the person as well. And what does well-being look like for the person. But I think the word closure, it sort of has this assumption that at some point I can close that book and put it away and I'll never have to read it again. And I don't think that's true. I think it can be stored more neatly on your bookshelf, but it will always be there because it's a part of you. But how you interpret that part of you can change, and it can develop into, I suppose, a more compassionate meaning. Maybe you might feel empowered at some point. I wouldn't be doing this job had it not been for my experience. So there are things that have shifted in how I view my experiences and how I view myself as a result of that. But I still struggle with sex. So have I received closure by that definition? No. But do I feel as though I can put my book on a shelf and I'm happy with where it is? Yes, but there are still things that I need to work on. But I think that's true of humans in general. I think there's always things that we can want to improve about ourselves and things that we learn about ourselves, and we're constantly evolving. And I don't think this is any different. But I do think there's a pressure on people to recover and to have closure. And there's this stigma, I think, that, well, this happened 20 years ago. Why are you still impacted by this?
Right.
there's a narrative, I think, that healing has an expiration date, and that's just not true.
Yeah, there's someone who helped with the initial development of Enough who spoke to us about her experience, and she said that she initially felt that, it was a nightmare that she would live through every day. And now she's got to the point where it's almost like it's a movie that she could watch, but it's happening to someone else. It doesn't feel like it's happening to her. And again, I think maybe closure implies things that aren't helpful, but I think there is some level of acceptance and moving forwards with your life and it not affecting you in a way that is to the detriment of everything else that you want to do. And that is possible for people to reach that point. The thing that can make it possible is early intervention. And there's this paradox of trauma that the more you bury it, the worse it gets inside. And one of the things that's really exciting about this new recovery platform that we're working on is that we're going to be helping people at the earliest point to prevent the onset of things getting far worse for them. That's why it's actually far worse for someone 20 years on, and that sort of compounded shame and the theory of there being this expiration date is so out of touch. So we can help people get to that point sooner, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah, there is hope. I think that that's something that really doesn't get talked about enough, that like you can live a really whole, beautiful, incredible life after sexual assault. And like you were
Yeah.
saying, Katie, it is important to have the early intervention. But I think even if there isn't, it doesn't mean that you're
Yeah.
going to be in shambles for the rest of your life. And so
Yeah.
yeah, that's always been important to me as well.
I think there's just one really simple point on that. And yes, women are kind of overly diagnosed with mental health disorders after experiencing any kind of trauma, but especially sexual trauma. But I think it's just thinking about the language we use again, and that often very, very normal responses to trauma are pathologized as some kind of disorder or mental health condition. Even post-traumatic stress disorder, the word disordered, it has connotations that it's unhealthy, it's not normal. But actually what we spoke about right at the beginning with your nervous system is responding unconsciously in a way that's trying to keep you alive. And that includes the things that happen after the trauma, and the way that you cope with that trauma is normal, and it's not something that should be clinically diagnosed and then become part of your identity, because I think that then reduces hope sometimes. If I have a certain label attached to me, it means that this must just be how my brain works. This is a chemical imbalance. Or I think, that again, this is a podcast in itself, but I think it's really important that, trauma responses are normal and that they shouldn't be pathologized.
I would love to ask you each to tell me, what is one thing that you think people don't say about sexual assault?
Well, pretty much everything right now. And that's why we're in this problem. I think we need to start saying things. I think we need to start saying it's a national emergency. We need to start saying that the blame lies on perpetrators, not on survivors. We need to start being brave in friendship groups. We need to give survivors the tools and safe spaces they need so that they can say that it's happened to them. So yeah, I think we need to start saying pretty much everything.
That's fair. I'm with you there.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo Katie there. I think, the things that people don't say about sexual assault is that they've been sexually assaulted. And that doesn't mean that they've not acknowledged and realized that it's happened. It means that they've not felt safe enough to disclose it. I do also think that there is a really big area that is massively missed when it comes to recovery after sexual violence, and that is the sexuality stuff that we've been talking about. I think there's a lot more documentation around post-traumatic response, flashbacks, anxiety, avoidance of certain places, certain people. But I think what's not discussed is that enjoying sex and struggling to do so is incredibly normal, and yet it's not prioritized as part of your overall recovery. So I think that's something that doesn't get discussed enough, and something that, we're trying to advocate for.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you for being here. I love what you guys are doing at Enough. I can't wait for it to be like, it's a hard thing because obviously, like, you don't want there to be a need for what you guys are doing, but there is. And the problem is massive. And this is a serious epidemic across the world. And so I'm looking forward to the day where maybe we don't need enough, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And for now, I'm so grateful that you guys are providing tools for people and giving people a space to be able to report. And I'm really grateful for what you guys are doing and that you've chosen to do this for a living. That's amazing. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Of
thank
course.
you.
Thank you to everybody who tuned in today. I love you guys so much. If you want to follow us on socials, everything will be linked down below. If you want to send us a message, go to whattheydon'tsay.com. I love to hear from you guys. And I will see you next week. I'll catch you on the flip side. And cheers.
Cheers.